I found out my snowplow keys were missing on the worst possible morning in February, right when Denver was getting hammered by 18 inches of fresh powder, and the neighborhood needed clearing more than ever. My name is Isaac Henderson, and I run a private snow removal business in the suburbs of Aurora, Colorado. For the past 8 years, I've been the go-to guy for everyone on Maple Ridge Drive and the surrounding streets. My setup is simple but effective. A Ford F-350 with a professional-grade plow attachment, backup equipment, and a strict schedule that keeps driveways and roads clear before most people even finish their morning coffee. That morning, though, everything went sideways because of one person. Brenda Carmichael, the newly elected president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. I'd parked my truck in my driveway the night before, like always. The keys should have been hanging on their designated hook in my mudroom, right next to my work gloves and emergency supplies. Instead, the hook was empty. I checked my pockets, the kitchen counter, the coffee table, even the bathroom sink. Nothing. My backup keys were in my truck's center console, locked inside, which meant I needed my primary set to get to them. The logic loop made my head hurt. My phone started buzzing before I could fully process the situation. Mrs. Peterson from 3 houses down wanted to know when I'd be clearing her driveway. Then Mr. Rodriguez called about the cul-de-sac. Then the Johnsons about their steep incline that became a skating rink in weather like this. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, promising I'd figure it out soon. That's when I remembered the small GPS tracker I'd attached to my keyring 6 months ago. It wasn't paranoia, just practical thinking after I'd dropped my keys in a snowbank the previous winter and spent 3 hours searching. The tracker was basic but effective, connecting to an app on my phone. I opened it up, watching the little blue dot load on the screen. The keys weren't in my house. They weren't even on my property. According to the GPS, they were currently sitting at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive, which happened to be Brenda Carmichael's address. My blood pressure spiked immediately. Brenda had been making my life difficult since October, when she'd taken over the HOA with promises to restore order and aesthetic standards to our neighborhood. She'd started with complaints about my truck being too large and industrial-looking for a residential area. Then she'd moved on to citations about where I parked it, claiming the driveway placement violated some obscure bylaw from 1987. Last month, she'd actually tried to pass a rule banning commercial snow removal operations within the neighborhood, arguing that residents should either shovel themselves or hire from an approved vendor list that she'd personally curated. The vote had failed barely, but Brenda hadn't taken the loss well. She'd shown up at my door twice since then, armed with a clipboard and a tight-lipped smile, informing me about various violations she'd discovered. My truck was 3 inches too far forward on my driveway. My equipment shed was visible from the street, which violated aesthetic guidelines. My business signage, a small magnetic decal on my truck door, was technically advertising and therefore prohibited. I'd been patient. I'd been polite. I'd followed every legitimate rule and pushed back on the manufactured ones with documentation and HOA bylaws that contradicted her interpretations. But this was theft. I pulled on my winter gear and trudged through the accumulating snow toward Brenda's house, phone in hand with the GPS app still showing my keys' location. The neighborhood was beautiful in that pristine, pre-plowed way, with snow covering everything in smooth white curves. Other mornings, I'd have already been out here, making it safe and accessible. Instead, I was hunting down stolen property. Brenda's house was immaculate as expected. 2 stories of pale yellow siding with white trim, decorative shutters that had never seen actual use, and a garden that probably cost more to maintain than my truck. Her driveway, ironically, was completely snowed in. I noted with some satisfaction that she'd be trapped until someone cleared it, and given how she'd alienated most of the neighborhood, that someone wouldn't be arriving anytime soon. I rang her doorbell, already composing my confrontation in my head. Stay calm, state facts, demand the keys back. If she refused, call the police. Simple. Brenda answered wearing a cream-colored sweater and perfectly applied makeup, as if she hadn't just woken up to a winter storm. Her expression shifted from neutral to coldly pleasant when she saw me. Isaac, this is unexpected. Is there something I can help you with? My keys are missing, I said, keeping my voice level. My Snowplow keys specifically, and according to the GPS tracker on my keyring, they're currently inside your house. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. The tracker doesn't lie. My keys are here at this address, probably within 20 feet of where we're standing. I held up my phone, showing her the app with its damning blue dot. So I'll ask directly, did you take my keys? That's quite an accusation. Her voice went sharp. Are you seriously standing on my doorstep accusing me of theft? That's slanderous, Isaac. I could have you reported to the HOA board for harassment. You are the HOA board, I pointed out, or at least you act like it. President, remember. And I'm not making accusations. I'm following evidence. My keys disappeared from my house overnight and now they're in yours. That's not speculation. That's tracking technology. Brenda's jaw tightened. Perhaps your little gadget is malfunctioning. Technology isn't infallible. I certainly don't have your keys, and I resent the implication. Then you won't mind if I call the police to sort this out. Go ahead. She crossed her arms. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your harassment campaign against a woman trying to maintain community standards. Do you know how many complaints I've filed about your operation? Documented violations. This could be construed as retaliation. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, maintaining eye contact. When the operator answered, I explained the situation calmly. Stolen property, GPS evidence, uncooperative homeowner. They said they'd send an officer. Brenda's confidence wavered for just a moment. This is absurd. You're wasting police resources over a personal vendetta. If you didn't take them, then there's nothing to worry about, I said. The police will check. The keys won't be here and I'll owe you an apology. But if they are here, we're going to have a very different conversation. We stood there in her doorway, snow accumulating around us, until a patrol car pulled up 15 minutes later. Officer Martinez stepped out, a middle-aged guy I'd seen around the neighborhood before. He'd always been friendly, had even hired me for his own driveway a few times. Isaac, hey. What's going on? I explained again, showing him the GPS app. Officer Martinez examined it, nodding slowly, then turned to Brenda. Madam, do you have this gentleman's keys? Absolutely not, Brenda said firmly. This is harassment, officer. He's been upset about HOA citations I've issued, and now he's using this GPS nonsense to create problems for me. The GPS is hardly nonsense, Officer Martinez said. It's pretty clear technology. Isaac, you're certain the keys are inside the residence? According to the tracker, yes. They're close within this building's footprint. Officer Martinez looked at Brenda. Would you consent to a search? It would clear this up quickly. I will not, Brenda said, her voice rising slightly. This is my private property. I don't have his keys, and I'm not allowing a search based on some app that could be showing anything. For all we know, he planted this story to violate my privacy. That's not how GPS trackers work, I said, frustration bleeding into my tone. They track the physical device. The device is on my keyring. The keyring is in your house. Officer Martinez held up a hand. Okay, let's all stay calm. Madam, without consent, I'd need a warrant to search, but I have to tell you the GPS evidence is pretty compelling. If the keys are found here later, this situation gets more complicated legally. Then you'll need your warrant, Brenda said. I'm not consenting to anything, and I want it noted that I'm being harassed over HOA business. Officer Martinez sighed and turned to me. Isaac, I believe you, but my hands are tied without consent or a warrant. I'll file a report. You should document everything with the GPS. If the keys are where you say they are, we'll have grounds for theft charges, but it's going to take time. Time I don't have, I said. My whole neighborhood needs plowing. People can't get to work. This is her way of shutting down my business. I understand, but legally, this is the process. Officer Martinez shot Brenda a look that suggested he wasn't buying her story either. Madam, I strongly suggest you think about this situation. If those keys turn up, we're looking at theft, possibly breaking and entering depending on how they were obtained. I'm confident in my innocence, Brenda said coldly. Officer Martinez took my statement, documented the GPS evidence with photos of my phone screen, and promised to follow up. As he drove away, Brenda gave me a thin smile. I hope this was worth your time, Isaac. You've now got a police harassment complaint on record. The HOA board will be hearing about this. You are the board, I repeated. But sure, report yourself. Let me know how that goes. I walked back home, furious and stuck. Without keys, my truck sat useless. My phone kept buzzing with increasingly anxious calls from neighbors. I explained the situation to each one, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. Most were sympathetic. A few were skeptical. Mrs. Henderson from the corner lot asked why I didn't just break into my own truck if the spare keys were inside. Because that's illegal and I'm not giving Brenda more ammunition, I explained. Plus, the truck has an alarm system. I called a locksmith, but with the storm, they were backed up for hours. The earliest appointment was late afternoon. Meanwhile, the snow kept falling and my business was effectively paralyzed. Around noon, my neighbor Pete Williams knocked on my door. Pete was retired military, straightforward and practical, and one of the few people who'd actively opposed Brenda's HOA overreach from the start. Heard what happened, he said, stomping snow off his boots. That woman's out of control. That's putting it mildly. Look, I've got some experience with this kind of thing. Military police background. You've got solid evidence with that GPS, but you need more to push this forward. Has she done anything else suspicious? Any other confrontations? I thought about it. She came by last week, asked to inspect my equipment shed, said there were complaints about me storing hazardous materials, which is garbage. I use standard fuel and oil, all properly contained. I didn't let her in without proper notice per the HOA rules. Smart. She was probably looking for something to use against you. Pete pulled out his phone. I'm going to make some calls. I know a lawyer who handles property disputes and HOA cases. This goes beyond a simple theft. She's interfering with your livelihood. While Pete worked his contacts, I monitored the GPS tracker obsessively. The blue dot didn't move from Brenda's house. That was good for evidence but infuriating for everything else. I pulled out my truck's registration and insurance papers, documenting everything in case I needed it for a legal case. Pete's lawyer friend, a woman named Sandra Chen, called me directly an hour later. Mr. Henderson, Pete filled me in. This is definitely actionable, but we need to build the case properly. The GPS evidence is strong, but a good defense attorney could argue technical malfunction or interference. Do you have any witnesses or cameras that might have caught her entering your property? I've got a doorbell camera, I said, suddenly hopeful. Let me check the footage. I pulled up the app on my phone, scrolling back to the previous night. The camera had motion detection, and sure enough, there was activity at 2:47 a.m. The footage showed a figure approaching my front door, trying the handle, then moving out of frame toward the side of my house where the mudroom entrance was located. The figure was bundled up against the cold, but the build and gait were distinctly feminine. More importantly, when the person turned briefly toward the camera, I caught a clear glimpse of Brenda Carmichael's face under a dark winter hat. Got her, I breathed. I've got video of Brenda on my property in the middle of the night. Send that to me immediately, Sandra said. And send it to the police. That changes everything. She's now caught on camera trespassing, and combined with the GPS evidence, you've got a solid theft case. I sent the footage to Sandra and forwarded it to Officer Martinez with an explanation. He called back within minutes. Isaac, this is exactly what we needed. I'm heading back to the station now to get a warrant. With video evidence of her on your property and GPS evidence of your property in her house, a judge will sign off. Sit tight. How long? Could be a few hours, could be faster. Depends on the judge's schedule, but this is moving forward. The locksmith finally arrived around 3 p.m., just as the snow was starting to taper off. He managed to get my truck open, and I retrieved my spare keys from the center console. Relief flooded through me, immediately followed by urgency. I'd lost most of the day, but I could still get the main roads cleared before evening. I fired up the truck, feeling the familiar rumble of the engine, and started working. The neighborhood had about 8 inches accumulated by then, and I moved methodically through my route. Driveways, streets, cul-de-sacs. People waved from windows, some came out to thank me. Mrs. Peterson actually hugged me, which was awkward but sweet. We heard what Brenda did, she said. That woman needs to be removed from the HOA. She's making everyone miserable. As I worked, I kept my phone handy, waiting for word from Officer Martinez. The call came around 5 p.m., just as the sun was setting and I was finishing the last street. We've got the warrant. Heading to Carmichael's residence now. You should probably be there since it's your property. I drove to Brenda's house, parking my truck conspicuously in front. 2 patrol cars were already there, along with Officer Martinez and another officer I didn't recognize. Brenda stood in her doorway, arms crossed, looking furious. "This is outrageous," she was saying as I approached. "A warrant over car keys. This is an abuse of power." "Madam, it's a warrant for stolen property with supporting evidence," Officer Martinez said patiently. "If the keys aren't here, we'll be out of your hair quickly." Brenda's eyes locked onto me. "This is your doing. You're going to regret this, Isaac." "When the HOA, madam, please step aside," the other officer interrupted. "The warrant allows us to search the premises." Brenda had no choice but to comply, though she followed the officers inside, protesting loudly. I waited outside with Officer Martinez, watching through the windows as lights flicked on in different rooms. "How confident are you in that GPS?" Officer Martinez asked quietly. "Very. It's been accurate within a few feet every time I've used it." "Let's hope so. If we don't find them, this gets messy for you legally." But my confidence was justified. 10 minutes later, one of the officers emerged holding a familiar keyring with my truck key, my house key, and the small GPS tracker still attached. He held them up triumphantly. "Found them in the garage, tucked inside a storage cabinet." Relief and vindication hit simultaneously. Officer Martinez nodded. "All right. Madam, you need to step outside, please." Brenda emerged looking pale, her earlier confidence completely gone. Those must have been planted. Someone broke in and planted them to frame me. Madam, we have video evidence of you on Mr. Henderson's property last night. We have GPS evidence tracking the keys from his residence to yours. And now we've recovered the stolen property from your home. You're under arrest for theft and trespassing. The other officer read Brenda her rights while Martinez handcuffed her. The scene was surreal, watching this woman who'd spent months making my life difficult being placed in the back of a patrol car. Neighbors had started emerging from their houses, drawn by the police presence, and word spread quickly. Pete Williams appeared at my elbow. Well, that's one way to solve an HOA problem. I didn't want this, I said, and I meant it. I just wanted to do my job. She made her choices. Actions have consequences. Officer Martinez handed me my keys. These are yours. We'll need your formal statement at the station, probably tomorrow since it's getting late. But the case is solid. With the video and GPS evidence, plus the keys recovered from her property, she's looking at theft charges, criminal trespassing, possibly more depending on how the DA wants to pursue it. What about breaking and entering? Depends on how she got in. If your doors were unlocked and she just walked in, it's trespassing. If she forced entry, even picking a lock, that's breaking and entering. We'll investigate further. I checked my mudroom door later and found scratches around the lock that I hadn't noticed before. The lock itself seemed intact, but there were marks suggesting someone had used tools on it. I documented everything with photos and sent them to Officer Martinez. The next morning, after finishing an early round of plowing since more snow had fallen overnight, I went to the police station to give my formal statement. The process was straightforward, walking a detective through the timeline, providing all my evidence and answering questions about my interactions with Brenda. She's claiming this was all a setup, Detective Morris told me, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes. Says you've been harassing her over HOA business and manufactured this scenario to retaliate. Does that make any sense, though? How would I manufacture her breaking into my house on camera? How would I force her to hide my keys in her garage? It doesn't make sense, which is why she's still in custody. Her bail hearing is this afternoon. But I need to know, is there any chance, any at all, that your GPS tracker malfunctioned? That maybe it showed the wrong location. I tested it after we recovered the keys. Put them in different locations around my house and checked the tracker each time. It was accurate within 2 meters every single time. Good. That's what we needed. Detective Morris leaned back in her chair. Between you and me, I think Mrs. Carmichael had a plan to disrupt your business enough that you'd give up or move. She probably figured without your keys, especially during a storm, you'd be dead in the water. Customers would hire other services, you'd lose income, maybe eventually have to shut down. That's insane. That's HOA politics sometimes. People get power and go crazy with it. She tapped her pen on her desk. We're also looking into whether she's done this kind of thing before. Other residents in your neighborhood. Any idea if others have had conflicts with her? I thought about it. The Robinsons on Oak Street mentioned something about mysterious citations that seemed made up. And the Yates family got fined for having their trash cans visible from the street, even though everyone does that on collection day. But I don't know about anything criminal. We'll follow up. If there's a pattern of harassment or abuse of power, it strengthens the case. The bail hearing happened that afternoon without my presence, but Pete Williams attended and filled me in later. Brenda's lawyer had argued she was a respected community member with no prior record, that the charges were based on circumstantial evidence, and that she posed no flight risk. The prosecutor countered with the video evidence, GPS tracking, and the recovered property, painting a picture of someone who'd committed a calculated crime to harm a business competitor. The judge set bail at $10,000, which Brenda posted immediately. She was released with conditions: no contact with me, no involvement in HOA activities pending the case's resolution, and she had to surrender her passport. That last part was interesting. Pete had learned that Brenda owned a vacation property in Cabo San Lucas and spent winters there. The prosecution apparently considered her enough of a flight risk to take precautions. The HOA board, which consisted of Brenda and two largely inactive members who'd let her run things unchecked, held an emergency meeting the next week. I attended, along with about 30 other homeowners who'd heard about the situation. The tiny community center was packed. The two other board members, Donald Kim and Patricia Lopez, looked deeply uncomfortable. Donald spoke first. Given the recent legal situation involving our president, Brenda Carmichael, the board has decided to place her on indefinite leave from her position. Vice President Lopez will assume presidential duties until further notice. Patricia, a retired teacher in her 60s, nodded. I want to assure everyone that the board takes these allegations seriously. We're conducting a full review of all citations, fines, and enforcement actions from the past year to ensure everything was handled appropriately. What about the bogus rules she tried to pass? Someone called from the back. The commercial vehicle bans, the approved vendor lists. We'll be reviewing all recent proposals, Patricia said. If anything was implemented improperly, it will be corrected. Our goal is to return to fair, reasonable community management. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me with stories of their own Brenda encounters. The Robinsons had received a citation for their lawn being a 1/4 inch too long, measured by Brenda herself with a ruler. The Yates family had been fined $200 for a garden gnome that allegedly violated aesthetic guidelines, even though the guidelines said nothing about lawn decorations. The Martins had been threatened with legal action over a basketball hoop in their driveway, something dozens of families in the neighborhood had. She was targeting people, Mrs. Robinson said, anger clear in her voice. Anyone she decided didn't fit her vision for the neighborhood. You were just the biggest target because your business was visible. I compiled all these stories and forwarded them to Detective Morris, who seemed increasingly interested in building a broader case. It turned out several other residents had security camera footage of Brenda prowling around properties late at night, presumably looking for violations to document. This goes beyond your theft case, Morris told me during a follow-up call. We're looking at a pattern of harassment, stalking behavior, and abuse of authority. The DA is considering additional charges. The preliminary hearing was set for March, giving both sides time to prepare. Sandra Chen agreed to represent me not just in the criminal case, but also in a civil suit for damages, loss of income, and emotional distress. HOA cases can be gold mines if there's clear abuse of power, she explained during our meeting. You've got documented harassment, interference with your business, and now criminal behavior. We can argue for compensatory damages, possibly punitive damages depending on how the criminal case goes. I don't want to bankrupt her, I said. I just want to be left alone to do my job. Understandable, but there need to be consequences. Otherwise, she or someone like her will do this again to someone else. In the meantime, life returned to a weird sort of normal. I continued my snow removal business, and with Brenda sidelined, the harassment stopped completely. Patricia Lopez proved to be a reasonable HOA president, approving a formal resolution that recognized small business operations within the neighborhood as acceptable provided they met basic noise and parking standards. My operation met all of them easily. The neighborhood dynamics had shifted too. People were friendlier, more openly supportive. I got more business, actually, as word spread about what had happened. Residents from neighboring communities started hiring me, impressed by how I'd stood up to HOA overreach. Brenda, for her part, became a ghost. Her house showed minimal activity, just her car coming and going occasionally. She'd stopped attending community events, stopped walking her usual neighborhood routes. Pete Williams reported that she'd hired a high-powered criminal defense attorney from Denver, someone known for aggressive tactics. The preliminary hearing in March was my first time seeing Brenda since her arrest. She looked different, smaller somehow, wearing a conservative suit and keeping her eyes down. Her attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Gregory Walsh, immediately moved to dismiss the charges, arguing insufficient evidence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Reeves, was unimpressed. Counsel, the state has video evidence of your client on the plaintiff's property. GPS evidence tracking stolen property to your client's residence, and physical recovery of said property from your client's garage. On what grounds are you claiming insufficient evidence? Walsh tried arguing that the video was unclear, that GPS could malfunction, that someone else could have planted the keys. Judge Reeves shut him down on each point, noting that the defense would have opportunity to challenge evidence at trial, but that the preliminary showing was more than sufficient. The case proceeds to trial, she ruled. Mrs. Carmichael remains on bail under existing conditions. Trial was set for late May, which meant months of waiting. Sandra Chen used the time to build the civil case, deposing Brenda, examining HOA records, and documenting every instance of harassment and abuse of authority. The patterns she uncovered were damning. Brenda had issued over 200 citations in her 6 months as HOA president, compared to fewer than 30 in the entire previous year. She'd created new rules without proper board approval, threatened residents with legal action over imaginary violations, and kept a detailed spreadsheet of problem properties that read like an enemy's list. This woman was running a personal fiefdom, Sandra told me, showing me the documents. She genuinely believed she had the authority to control every aspect of neighborhood life. Your case just happened to be the one where she went too far and got caught. In April, the DA's office added additional charges: stalking, harassment, and abuse of authority. They'd interviewed over a dozen residents who'd experienced similar treatment, building a picture of systematic misconduct. Walsh fought every addition, but the evidence was overwhelming. The criminal trial began on May 23rd in Arapahoe County Court. I took the witness stand on day 2, walking the jury through everything: my business, the missing keys, the GPS evidence, the video footage, and the recovery. Walsh tried to shake my testimony during cross-examination, but the facts were too solid. "Isn't it true you had multiple conflicts with Mrs. Carmichael over HOA rules?" he asked. I had conflicts over her interpretation of HOA rules, yes. She was issuing citations that didn't align with the actual bylaws. And you resented her authority. I resented being harassed for doing my job, which was completely legal and within community guidelines. Harassed is a strong word, Mr. Henderson. She showed up at my house multiple times, issued bogus citations, tried to ban my business, and eventually broke into my home to steal my equipment. If that's not harassment, I don't know what is. The video footage was played for the jury, showing Brenda clearly approaching my property in the middle of the night. Walsh tried to argue it was unclear, but the timestamp and Brenda's visible face undermined his position. The GPS evidence came next, with an expert witness explaining how the tracking system worked and confirming its accuracy. The prosecution also called several neighbors who testified about their own experiences with Brenda's behavior. Mrs. Robinson described the lawn ruler incident. Mr. Yates talked about the garden gnome fine. The Martins explained the basketball hoop threat. Each story painted Brenda as someone obsessed with control and willing to bend or break rules to maintain it. Brenda took the stand in her own defense, which proved to be a mistake. She claimed she'd been trying to maintain community standards, that residents like me were making the neighborhood look low class, and that her actions were justified by her role as HOA president. "Did you take Mr. Henderson's keys?" the prosecutor asked directly. "No," Brenda said, but her voice wavered. "Did you enter his property on the night of February 8th? I was checking for violations. That's my job. At 2:47 in the morning. I'd received complaints about noise." "From whom?" Brenda hesitated. "I don't recall specifically." "You don't recall who complained, but you remember checking for noise violations in the middle of the night during a snowstorm." The jury wasn't buying it. I could see it in their faces, the skepticism and disbelief. Walsh tried damage control during redirect, but the harm was done. The closing arguments laid everything out clearly. The prosecution emphasized the evidence: video, GPS, physical recovery, and a pattern of harassment that had escalated to criminal behavior. The defense argued reasonable doubt, suggesting maybe someone else had entered my property, maybe the GPS had malfunctioned, maybe the keys had been planted in Brenda's garage. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: theft, criminal trespassing, stalking, harassment, and abuse of authority. Brenda's face crumpled when the verdict was read. Walsh immediately moved for a mistrial, which Judge Reeves denied. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. I felt relief more than triumph. This had never been about revenge or punishment. It had been about stopping someone from destroying my livelihood and making my life miserable. The verdict accomplished that. The civil case was settled out of court 2 weeks later. Brenda's insurance covered most of it, and she personally agreed to pay $50,000 in damages, covering lost income, legal fees, and compensation for the harassment. Sandra had pushed for more, but I was satisfied. The money mattered less than the acknowledgement that what she'd done was wrong. Sentencing happened on June 15th. Judge Reeves heard victim impact statements from me and several other affected residents. I kept mine brief, explaining how Brenda's actions had threatened my business and violated my sense of security in my own home. "I don't want to see Mrs. Carmichael's life destroyed," I said, "but there have to be consequences for what she did. People in positions of authority can't abuse that power without accountability." Judge Reeves sentenced Brenda to 18 months in prison, with eligibility for parole after 9 months, plus 3 years of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service. She also ordered Brenda to resign permanently from the HOA board and prohibited her from holding any HOA position in the future. "Mrs. Carmichael, you violated the trust of your community," Judge Reeves said. "You used your position to harass, intimidate, and ultimately commit crimes against residents you were supposed to serve. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your actions and the impact on your victims." Brenda was led away in handcuffs, her lawyer already talking about appeals, though everyone knew they wouldn't go anywhere. In the aftermath, the Maple Ridge HOA underwent significant reforms. Patricia Lopez and the board rewrote the bylaws with input from residents, creating clearer guidelines and better checks on presidential authority. They established an appeals process for citations and required board votes on any new rules or enforcement actions. My business thrived. The publicity from the case, while not something I'd sought, brought in new clients throughout Aurora and even into Denver proper. People appreciated the story of standing up to HOA overreach, and many had their own horror stories about power-hungry board members. Pete Williams was elected to the HOA board in the fall, running on a platform of transparency and reasonable governance. He won by a landslide. Under the new leadership, the neighborhood felt different, more relaxed and genuinely community-oriented rather than controlled. I still see Brenda's house sometimes when I'm plowing. It went up for sale in July, a quiet listing that moved fast despite everything. A nice young family bought it, the Patels, with 2 kids who play basketball in the driveway and a garden full of gnomes. They hired me to plow their driveway. The whole experience taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself, documenting everything, and not letting people abuse their authority unchallenged. It also taught me about community, as I'd watched neighbors come together to support each other against Brenda's overreach. Life in Maple Ridge returned to normal, or rather, a better version of normal. The HOA handled actual issues like street repairs and community events, not manufactured violations and power trips. Residents felt free to live their lives without fear of arbitrary citations or harassment. As for my snowplow keys, they never left my sight again. I added a second GPS tracker for good measure and installed better locks on all my doors. Some might call it paranoia, but I call it learning from experience. Winter came around again the following year, and I was ready. My truck was maintained, my equipment was sharp, and my keys were secure. The first major storm hit in early November, and I cleared the neighborhood like clockwork, just like always. Mrs. Peterson brought me hot chocolate like she did every winter. The Robinsons waved from their window, their lawn at whatever length they wanted without fear of rulers and citations. The Martins' kids shot hoops in their freshly plowed driveway, and Mr. Yates' garden gnome stood proudly in his front yard. This was what a neighborhood should be. People living their lives, supporting each other, and not dealing with petty tyrants who'd lost sight of what community actually meant. Brenda's actions had been a wake-up call for everyone, a reminder that HOAs worked best when they served residents rather than controlling them. I'd heard through the grapevine that Brenda served 8 months before being paroled for good behavior. She'd moved to Arizona after her release, living near her sister, far from Colorado and the neighborhood she'd tried so hard to control. The Maple Ridge community didn't miss her, though I hoped she'd learned something from the experience. People deserve second chances, but they also need to earn them through genuine change. My business continued growing, expanding beyond snow removal to include landscaping and general property maintenance. I hired 2 employees, both local guys who needed work, and we operated out of a small office I rented in town. The HOA had no problem with it, and Patricia Lopez actually featured my business in the neighborhood newsletter as an example of local entrepreneurship. Pete Williams and I became good friends, bonding over our shared experience of dealing with Brenda's chaos. We'd grab beers sometimes and laugh about the absurdity of it all, though we both acknowledged how serious it had been at the time. He told me stories from his military police days that made the HOA drama seem tame, but he also admitted that civilian power struggles could be just as intense in their own way. At least in the military, there's clear chain of command and accountability, he'd said once. HOAs can be the Wild West if nobody's paying attention. That was the key insight, really, Accountability matters. Brenda had gone unchecked for months because the other board members hadn't been paying attention and residents hadn't pushed back strongly enough early on. By the time things escalated to theft, the damage was significant. The neighborhood learned from that. Board meetings became well attended, with residents actually reading the bylaws and asking questions. Elections were competitive, with multiple candidates offering different visions for community management. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, a tool for maintaining property values and organizing community activities, not a mechanism for control. I thought about all of this while plowing through another Denver winter, my truck humming smoothly, my keys secure in my pocket with their GPS trackers intact. The work was satisfying, seeing driveways transform from snow-covered obstacles to clear, safe spaces. People depended on me, and I took that responsibility seriously. Sandra Chen called occasionally to check in, making sure I hadn't encountered any other legal issues. The civil settlement money had been put to good use, upgrading my equipment and expanding my business. She was pleased with how everything had turned out, calling it one of her most satisfying cases. Not many people stand up to HOA abuse, she'd told me. Most just suffer through it or move away. You fought back with evidence and determination and you won. That matters. It did matter, not just for me but for everyone else who'd been dealing with Brenda's harassment. The other residents who'd testified at trial told me they felt vindicated, finally able to enjoy their homes without constant scrutiny and threats. The neighborhood felt lighter, more relaxed, like a collective weight had been lifted. The Patel family who'd bought Brenda's old house integrated seamlessly into the community. Their kids played with other neighborhood children, they hosted a summer barbecue that half the street attended, and they volunteered for HOA committees. It was as if the house itself was relieved to have normal, happy occupants. Sometimes I'd drive past that house and remember the confrontation on Brenda's doorstep, the GPS tracker showing my keys inside, the disbelief and anger I'd felt. Those emotions seemed distant now, replaced by satisfaction with how everything had resolved. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and life had moved forward. The story did make local news briefly. A few reporters had covered the trial, intrigued by the GPS tracker angle and the HOA abuse elements. One article called it a modern tale of technology and HOA overreach, which seemed overly dramatic but wasn't entirely inaccurate. The publicity had been mostly positive, with people reaching out to share their own HOA horror stories and thank me for standing up. I declined most interview requests, uncomfortable with the attention. This had never been about becoming some kind of anti-HOA crusader or public figure. It had been about solving a problem, protecting my business, and holding someone accountable for their actions. The fact that it resonated with others was nice but not the point. As spring arrived and the snow finally melted for good, I transitioned my business to landscaping and property maintenance. The seasonal shift was always welcome, trading the early morning plow runs for more varied outdoor work. The Maple Ridge neighborhood kept me busy, along with contracts in surrounding areas. One afternoon in late April, I was trimming hedges at the Johnsons' house when Patricia Lopez stopped by. She'd been an excellent HOA president, balancing community needs with individual freedom in ways Brenda never had. "Isaac, got a minute?" she asked. "Sure, what's up?" "The board wants to officially thank you for everything last year. Your willingness to stand up and fight back probably saved this neighborhood from years of dysfunction. We'd like to present you with an appreciation award at the next community meeting." I was touched, but also a bit embarrassed. "That's not necessary. I was just protecting my business. Maybe, but the impact went beyond that. You showed people they could challenge abuse of authority. You documented everything properly and used the system the way it's supposed to work. That matters, and we want to acknowledge it. I agreed, mainly because refusing seemed more awkward than accepting. The community meeting 2 weeks later was surprisingly well attended, and Patricia presented me with a plaque that read, "In appreciation for service and courage in defending community values." There was applause and handshakes, and several people thanked me personally. It felt surreal, being celebrated for what had started as a crisis on a snowy morning. But I understood what they meant. Standing up to bullies, whether in an HOA or anywhere else, required courage and persistence. I'd shown both, and it had made a difference. The summer passed peacefully. My business stayed busy, the neighborhood remained drama-free, and life felt stable in a way it hadn't during Brenda's tenure. I even started dating someone, a woman named Olivia Sanders who worked at the local library. We'd met when I was researching HOA law during the legal battle, and she'd helped me find relevant precedents and cases. Olivia found the whole story fascinating, having her own experiences with difficult HOA situations in a previous neighborhood. "They attract a certain type of person sometimes," she'd said. "People who want power but can't get it in their professional lives, so they turn to HOAs and condo boards." That analysis seemed right. Brenda had been a real estate agent whose career had plateaued, according to neighborhood gossip. The HOA presidency had given her authority and control she'd craved, and she'd abused it spectacularly. By the time autumn arrived, and I was preparing for another snow season, the whole incident felt like ancient history. I'd moved on, the neighborhood had moved on, and presumably Brenda had moved on in Arizona. The only lasting reminders were the improved HOA governance and my upgraded security measures. I never did hear from Brenda directly, no apology or explanation. Part of me wondered if she genuinely believed she'd been in the right, defending community standards against people like me who didn't understand proper neighborhood aesthetics. Or maybe she knew she'd been wrong but couldn't admit it, trapped by pride and embarrassment. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. The Keys incident, as I'd come to think of it, was closed. Justice had been served, reforms had been implemented, and I'd learned valuable lessons about standing up for myself and trusting evidence over emotions. The GPS tracker on my keyring remained, a small device that had solved a crime and changed a community. Every time I saw it, I remembered that technology and determination could overcome abuse of power, that documentation mattered, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply not give up. Maple Ridge Drive and its surrounding streets thrived under competent HOA leadership. Property values increased, not because of strict aesthetic enforcement, but because people wanted to live in a functional community without drama. The neighborhood gained a reputation as well-managed and resident-friendly, attracting families who valued that kind of environment. I expanded my business again the following year, adding a third employee and purchasing better equipment. The growth was steady and sustainable, built on reputation and good service rather than constant stress about HOA interference. It felt good, running a business without looking over my shoulder. Pete Williams retired from the HOA board after 2 productive terms, satisfied he'd helped stabilize things. New members came in with fresh perspectives, but maintained the reforms that had been implemented. The community had learned its lesson about unchecked authority and seemed determined not to repeat past mistakes. As for my snowplow keys, they stayed secure, tracked by GPS, protected by better locks, and always within reach. I'd never again take for granted the simple ability to do my job without interference. That February morning when they'd gone missing had been a wake-up call about vigilance and documentation, lessons I'd carry forward indefinitely. The story became something I'd occasionally tell new clients or neighbors who moved in later and heard second-hand versions. I'd explain what happened, the evidence I'd gathered, the legal process, and the eventual resolution. Most people were amazed, some were inspired, and a few shared their own HOA horror stories that made mine seem tame. "At least yours ended with accountability," one new neighbor said. "Mine just resulted in us moving." That was the difference, really. I'd had the resources, the evidence, and the determination to fight back. Not everyone did, which made the victory feel even more meaningful. It wasn't just about me. It was about showing what was possible when you stood up to abuse of power. Years would pass, and Maple Ridge would continue thriving. Children would grow up, families would move in and out, and the neighborhood would evolve naturally. But the reforms implemented after Brenda's downfall would remain, a lasting legacy of accountability and proper governance. I'd continue plowing snow every winter, maintaining properties every summer, and building a business I was proud of. The keys would stay secure, the GPS tracker would keep functioning, and I'd remember the lessons learned from one woman's overreach and eventual accountability. That was the real story behind the HOA Karen who took my snowplow keys. Not just about theft and recovery, but about community, justice, and the importance of standing up for what's right. It was about technology solving crime, evidence overcoming denial, and good governance replacing tyranny. In the end, Maple Ridge became what every neighborhood should be. A place where people could live their lives freely, support each other genuinely, and trust that their HOA existed to serve rather than control them. And I got to keep doing what I loved, plowing snow and maintaining properties, without fear of harassment or theft. The GPS tracker remained on my keyring, a small reminder of that February morning and everything that followed. It was just a piece of technology, but it had changed everything, leading police right to Brenda's garage door and solving a crime that had threatened my livelihood. Sometimes the smallest tools make the biggest difference, and I'd never forget that.